For nearly 30 years, the state of Alabama kept a date to kill Anthony Ray Hinton for 2 murders he did not commit. The entire case rested on a single bullet, and that bullet, it turned out, matched nothing at all. This is the story of how one piece of science and a broke defense sent an innocent man to death row for nearly 3 decades, how the system almost killed him for it, and how it never managed to take the one thing that kept him alive. In 1985, around Birmingham, Alabama, 2 fast food managers were murdered in separate late-night robberies. John Davidson in February, Thomas Wayne Vason in July. Both were killed for the cash in a restaurant safe. There were no eyewitnesses to either killing. There were no fingerprints. For months, the cases went nowhere. And an unsolved murder of a working man is exactly the kind of case a police department badly needs to close. Pressure to solve a killing is its own kind of force. It bends everything toward an answer. Any answer that will hold. 2 men were dead. A city wanted someone to pay for it. And when the survivor of a 3rd robbery pointed to a face in a photo array, the machinery of a capital case began to move. And it would not pause to ask whether it had the right man. Then weeks later, a 3rd restaurant was robbed. This time, the manager, a man named Sidney Smotherman, survived being shot at and later picked a face out of a photo lineup. The face belonged to a 29-year-old black man named Anthony Ray Hinton. That identification is the only reason Hinton entered this story at all. There was nothing else tying him to the first 2 murders. No witness, no print, no confession. Nothing except what the police believed a gun could tell them. But here's the fact the jury would be asked to set aside. At the moment of that 3rd robbery, Anthony Ray Hinton was 15 miles away, locked inside a supermarket warehouse, working a night shift. He was clocked in. A supervisor could place him there. His own time card could place him there. He could not have been in 2 places at once. In almost any other case, that is where a prosecution ends. A man locked inside a warehouse on the clock miles away is not your suspect, but the state had already decided who it was looking for, and it believed it had found something that could beat any alibi at all. That something was the bullets. Prosecutors claimed the bullets from the crime scenes had been fired from an old .38 caliber revolver that belonged to Hinton's mother, recovered from her home. There were no fingerprints, no eyewitness who saw the murders, no confession. There were only those bullets in a gun that had sat for years in an aging woman's house. If the bullets matched that revolver, the case was closed. If they didn't, the state had nothing. The entire question of whether a man would live or die came down to a duel between firearms experts. And this is where being poor decides everything. To fight the state's ballistics claim, Hinton needed a real forensic expert of his own. But his court-appointed lawyer was working under a belief that turned out to be false. He thought Alabama law capped the money for a defense expert at just $1,000. There was no such cap. The law would have paid for a qualified expert if he had only asked for it. He didn't ask. He took the $1,000, and with it, he hired the only person willing to work for that price. The man he found was a civil engineer named Andrew Payne. On the stand, under cross-examination, Payne admitted that he had sight in only one eye, and that he could not properly operate the comparison microscope, the very instrument used to match a bullet to a gun. The prosecutor took him apart in front of the jury, piece by piece. The one witness standing between Anthony Ray Hinton and the electric chair could not see and could not work his own equipment. Picture it, the man hired to defend a capital case, squinting into an instrument he could not operate, while the prosecutor asked him again and again to explain what he saw. He could not, and a jury watched the only science on Hinton's side come apart in real time. Understand what that $1,000 mistake really was. In a case built entirely on the science of matching a bullet to a gun, a man's life depended on having a scientist who could actually do it. The money was there for the asking. His lawyer, wrongly believing it wasn't, never asked. That single unasked question is what sent an innocent man toward death. The jury took about an hour. In September of 1986, they convicted him of both murders, and he was sentenced to die. Hinton always said what he believed put him there. He was black. He was poor. He could not afford a defense that could fight back. And in Alabama in 1986, that was enough. He would say later that he understood exactly what he must have looked like to that jury. A poor black man from Alabama, accused of killing 2 people, with a broken-down witness for a defense and a court-appointed lawyer who had not fought for the money to defend him. In a system like that, he came to believe the verdict was written before the trial ever began, and it is hard to argue with him. The evidence was junk. The defense was broke. The jury was out for about an hour. In that room, on that day, the outcome had less to do with what had happened than with who was standing accused. He was sent to a cell the size of a bathroom on Alabama's death row, and he would stay there for the better part of 30 years. For the first 3 years, he barely spoke, swallowed by rage and grief at a system that would not listen. And then Anthony Ray Hinton made the decision that is the heart of this story. He decided that a cell could hold his body, but it would not hold his mind. He started a book club, condemned men meeting among the law books to argue about writers like James Baldwin. In his imagination, he simply left. He traveled the world. He married movie stars. He played center field for the New York Yankees. He found humor in a place with no reason for any. You can lock up a man's body, he understood. You cannot lock up what he allows himself to imagine. There were 7 of them in that book club at the start. Condemned men passing paperbacks down the row, arguing about the ending as if any of them had all the time in the world. They did not. But for an hour, in a house of the sentenced, a book could make the walls disappear. From the outside, that can sound like a small thing. A man telling himself stories to pass the time. It was not small. It was the difference between surviving and being erased. The state had taken his freedom, his good name, nearly 3 decades of his one life. The single thing it could not reach was the country he built inside his own head, and he defended it like the last free ground he had left. But imagination is not innocence, and the years kept coming. He had founded that book club with a handful of other condemned men, and one by one, over the years, he watched its members walk past his cell to be executed, until he was the last of them still breathing. Over his decades on the row, Hinton says he counted 54 men taken to the electric chair, close enough to know each one. Any year it could be his door. He came to know the sound of it, the particular quiet of the row on an execution night, the footsteps, the smell that followed. One by one, the men of his book club were taken until Anthony Ray Hinton was the only one of them left alive to remember they had ever existed. Then a lawyer named Bryan Stevenson and his Equal Justice Initiative took Hinton's case and would fight it for the next 16 years. 16 years spent trying to make a state admit it had condemned the wrong man. In 2002, Stevenson did the one thing Hinton's first defense never could. He put 3 of the most qualified firearms experts in the country on the stand, one of them from the FBI, and they testified plainly that the crime bullets could not be matched to that revolver. They could not even be certain the bullets had come from a single gun. This was not a loophole or a clever defense. It was the plain truth of the physical evidence, told by the best in the field. The one thread the entire death sentence hung from had never actually held. And still, for more than a decade after that, the state of Alabama refused to let him go. In the end, it took the Supreme Court of the United States. In 2014, in Hinton versus Alabama, the court ruled, and it was unanimous, 9-0. Every justice agreed that Hinton's original trial had been unconstitutional because his lawyer's failure to seek the money for a real expert, a failure built on that false belief about a $1,000 cap, had denied him a real defense. The right to a lawyer, the court has always said, means the right to a lawyer who does the basic work. In a case that lived and died on expert testimony, asking for the money to hire a competent expert was as basic as it gets. The verdict was thrown out. The case was sent back. And when the state finally had to prove its ballistics match again with modern experts, it couldn't. The evidence that had sent him to death row simply could not be reproduced because it had never been true. With no case left, prosecutors moved to drop the charges. It had taken 16 years of Bryan Stevenson's fight and 30 years of Anthony Ray Hinton's life to undo a 1-hour verdict built on a bullet that never matched. On April 3, 2015, Anthony Ray Hinton walked out of prison a free man after nearly 30 years. The 152nd person freed from death row in America after being wrongly condemned to die. He stepped into the sunlight and he said the words that would become the title of his book. The sun does shine. He had walked into that cell at 29 years old. He walked out at 58. Nearly 3 decades, the entire middle of a man's life, spent a few steps from an execution chamber for a crime that was never his. The 2 murders he spent 30 years condemned for were never solved. Think about what nearly killed him. Not a lie anyone could see through at a glance. The opposite. A neat, confident, official-sounding claim that a bullet matched a gun. It looked like science. It looked certain. And almost no one with the power to stop it ever checked whether it was actually true. That is the quiet danger in this story. The evidence that is most dangerous is not the evidence that looks weak. It is the evidence that looks certain, because certainty is exactly what stops us from looking closer. Anthony Ray Hinton lost 30 years to a bullet that matched nothing, and a defense that could not see. He walked out with his humor, his imagination, and his life, which, when a state spends 3 decades trying to end it, is its own kind of victory. If a system could do this to an innocent man, and very nearly get away with it, hit like, so that it's a little harder to look away.